Some of us may have been holding our breath the whole day, waiting for the final shape of the US midterms. But on another issue, concerning the fate of another public sphere, we have been holding our collective breath for a couple of weeks already. What is happening to Twitter? After Elon Musk's purchase of the social media company became final on October 28th, chaos descended. Is there an end to all this mess? Or will this mess end with the end of Twitter? Good evening. I'm John Nery, and you are in the public square. In the Philippine media ecosystem, Twitter is not and has never been a major platform. But because it attracts politicians, celebrities, scholars, civil society leaders, journalists, and yes, fans, lots of fans, it has nevertheless played an influential role. What does the musking of Twitter mean for the Philippine public? We have invited four resource persons who can help us with the answers. But even before we talk about the implications for our corner of the digital public sphere, let's first talk business. Why did Musk, the richest person on earth, proceed with the purchase of Twitter? What's the business proposition? The first two of our guests have a business and digital background that can help us make sense of that business decision. Dominic Doc Ligot is a former multinational banking executive and is an entrepreneur. He is also a data scientist and the founder of Data Ethics PH. Carl Javier is a writer and a creative writing teacher and the CEO of the pillar of Philippine podcasting, Puma Podcast. Welcome, gentlemen, and thank you for joining us in the public square.
Hi,
Evening.
John.
Doc, let me start with you. Why is Elon Musk in Twitter?
So obviously the question on everyone's minds, no. I'm sure many people have been observing Musk. For me, Musk is a very aspirational type of entrepreneur. And I think early on in his career, he said he wanted to, if he was going to invest, he would look at five things: the internet, AI, biology, and space. And most of his work has been on the latter two with Tesla and SpaceX. But Twitter actually represents the first two, internet and AI. So it wasn't a complete shock for me to see that he wanted to get into it. Of course, there's a lot of talk about, he wants to protect free speech. But for me, I've always seen it as a really an entrepreneurial decision on two fronts. One is there's certainly technology in Twitter that he must be interested in. There's a lot of speculation about him and Jack Dorsey looking at a totally new protocol, for example, and more will evolve in that space. And let's face it, Twitter, ever since, I think, except for a brief period, has always lost money. I think they're earning north of $5 billion a year, but they're losing hundreds of millions. So Musk has had a track record of turning around losing companies. So imagine the profit he will get once Twitter starts making money. So for me, it sounded very logical, but of course, there's a lot of talk about what it means for media. I think that's secondary to him. I think it's purely a business proposition.
Before we focus or dig deeper into the business decision, let me ask Carl, um, how was Twitter doing before Musk bought it, business-wise?
I think that it's a pretty generous assessment that Doc is giving. I think I'm coming at it from another angle, which is basically why would you pay $44 billion for a company that was valued under 30 billion? We knew that there were problems, particularly in the disinformation landscape. Musk was trying to come forward as like a free speech advocate because of big personalities getting kicked off Twitter. Like you said, Twitter is not the biggest platform by any means, but for some reason it is where important voices interact and we have the opportunity to connect with those voices. So it had a specific identity. It was trying to monetize, but it wasn't doing it as effectively as it could have. So I guess I agree with Doc in that there is an opportunity for Twitter to be more profitable, but I don't know if Musk is pushing in the direction that he needs to.
Yes, Doc. Carl mentioned that he had to, not he, not Carl, but Elon Musk had to contract out a loan for $44 billion. And I think a lot of that is hedged against his Tesla share. So, I mean, it's not just the fate of one company. Is it also right to think of it as the fate of his investment in Tesla that's at stake with his Twitter purchase?
Yeah, I mean, he's always done it that way. I remember when he was pushing for SpaceX, and I think as the story goes, their rockets blew up 3 times, no? And then on the fourth time they made it, and then they got $1 billion contract from NASA. So I think that's what really makes someone like Musk a little different from your typical billionaire. He likes betting everything. But on the other hand, I wouldn't underestimate him on that basis either, because everything he's been into, like email payments, PayPal, no one believed that when it came out, and then it predated Bitcoin as a digital payment, but now it's an industry standard. Electric cars were a joke, and then he came in. He didn't actually start Tesla; he bought into it, and then now Tesla is up there with the best cars in the world. And of course, the whole rocket thing. I mean, who wants to bet on space? Sabi nga na one interviewer, you don't bet on bet on the losers, you bet on the big losers. And then he turned it around, and now it's revitalizing the space exploration thing. So I think that's why I tend to think of him as more of an aspirational type of entrepreneur. He looks at a concept, and if it agrees with his kind of his philosophy, which goes back to Twitter. What's the philosophy behind it? And I think it's nice to talk about kind of the philosophical underpinnings later.
I wonder though, because I don't know if it's just me undergoing like a demystification of the Musk success story, in that it's he didn't actually like manage PayPal into success. He's buying into these things, and essentially, if we look at it, like, it seems rational once we're building out a rationality behind it, but he proposed to buy Twitter as a joke, and the valuation that he offered is based on like an internet meme. Like, he's the level at which we are to take that seriously. When it's someone like Elon Musk throwing money around, I understand like maybe there's a meta game that I'm not seeing, but I don't understand like where the treating it as a joke, then trying to back out, and then finally sort of getting pushed in, and then this whole thing sort of not being taken seriously. I guess baka nga I'm being played because maybe he has something deeper in this, but it doesn't seem like it's as serious as he's not taking it as seriously as I think it should be taken, especially on a $44 billion bet.
Doc, Carl, I get the sense that he doesn't really know what he's doing with Twitter. He sort of played it, made a joke, and then he was forced to it to make the joke come true because of legal considerations. Please correct me if I'm wrong. No? For instance, when so he knows that the money comes from the advertisers, and he had what looked like a productive meeting with the main advertisers a few days ago. And one of those advertisers tweeted a thread of comments saying, what we really want is a stable advertising environment and so on and so forth. And he had some criticisms to make, but which I thought were constructive. And, assuming that he had just come from that meeting with Musk, would be welcome. What Musk did was to block that guy. So we've had some advertisers pulling their budgets, and we've had some people suspend, advertising in Twitter. So am I just reading too much into this that he's making this up as we go along, or perhaps there really is, as Carl says, a meta game that we're not seeing?
Yeah, I don't know if people remember that there was maybe a few months before the purchase, there was all this bots are on Twitter. Remember that? And Twitter claims it's 5%. And then there was this circular route about he tried to back out, and then he got sued by Twitter. And
Mhm.
then during the court proceedings, Musk now had the legal right to demand in a deposition how much of Twitter's population were bots. So I found that, I don't know if that was a lucky thing, but that's smart of premeditation. Okay, I'm gonna try to get into a lawsuit, so now I now have a legal right to demand the information I want. And ultimately, he still went around and bought it. And even the way he bought it, he was already a big buyer of Twitter pala before. He had about, I don't know, mga 9% already, single largest shareholder. And he could have just done a hostile takeover at that point. But he instead went into this route, and now he's pretty much 100% backed by his banks and his shares, and he's taking it private so that there is no
Mhm.
more public scrutiny about how the company will be run. So for me, it sounds very reckless, even, but after the fact, there seems to be method in the madness. And I also, my gut is telling me everyone is thinking it's all about free speech. Even he says that. I think that's just politics, especially
Mhm.
the election making those comments. So I don't know. I wouldn't underestimate kind of the method in behind the acquisition.
Doc, I was going to ask this question. I'm going to pose this question to Carl, but I'll pose it to you instead. No? Is there a path to profitability? Can he, in fact, succeed and turn Twitter into a successful operation?
Yeah, well, it's without getting too dry about accounting, no.
Sure.
It's a $5 billion revenue base. That's
Mhm.
huge, no. In notwithstanding all of the advertising boycotts, and you can see one of the first things he's doing is really the easiest thing you can do to cut costs is to cut staff, and you can see some of the staff he cut politically doesn't look very good, like the ethical
Mhm.
AI team and the human
Mhm.
rights team. But if you look at it from operations, these people don't actually contribute anything operationally to Twitter. They're really more of R&D and think tank. And so that's excess cost. So it may not take a lot to bring Twitter to profit, but I think that's only just a short-term thing. Because why bother? You're already into Tesla, you're already into SpaceX. Why get your hands dirty with a social network? So that's why in my early, speculation, there's probably some technology in Twitter which may be related to all this ethical AI stuff. He's
Yeah.
also looking to leverage. Again, it's all guesswork. But yeah, I wouldn't get too carried away with kind of the smoke and mirrors, only because of that AI bot episode, which
Mhm.
I completely took me by surprise. Now, oh, nga, no, he was able to demand exactly how much bought information was on Twitter because of the lawsuit filed by Twitter. So it's really weird how he was able to,
Yes, I know. It's really a
sidestep.
complicated
Yeah.
thing. Carl, I was going to ask this question of Doc, but I'll pose it to you. No? What this decision of Musk's do you think will actually end up killing Twitter?
I don't think Twitter will be killed. I think that if he continues on this sort of reckless anti-censorship but also censorship thing, that's what's going to devalue the space. I think what I mean we'll wind up talking about this and the democracy and stuff. But if Twitter essentially becomes an unsafe space, and it just allows all the trolls in and becomes unchecked, like the hellscape that everyone is imagining, then it's not going to be viable for advertisers. We also see like in terms of profitability, if he's I don't agree with charging people for the blue checks, but
Mhm.
if he thinks that's a path, but then the landscape itself is not safe, then what's the value of your blue check? Um, if anybody can pay for that blue check, what's the point? Then it devalues everything there. Um, if uh, if as has been leaked, they're planning to start putting subscription payments here. That's another thing that if you have a hellscape, why would anyone subscribe into it? So inevitably, it's still a moderation issue. Doc is correct in that cutting staff is there because those aren't operational costs, and that can quickly bring down your spending. But at the same time, if that's if those are the people ensuring that this space remains safe, then it's automatically devaluing, even though you can continue your operations.
Mhm.
So it's these content censorship, all this stuff that might seem ancillary to business decisions because maybe there is some underlying tech, maybe there's something that they're not seeing. But if this tanks faster because of the hellscape prospect, then there might not be that much value left.
Thank you. I wanted to spend the first several minutes of our program dwelling on the business aspect of the masking of Twitter, because that's an entirely different issue, as Doc pointed out, from the changes in user experience, the issues in free speech, the implications for content moderation. Let me now bring our two other guests into the discussion. Attorney Dana Batnag is a veteran journalist who is now a human rights and data privacy lawyer. Carlos Nazareno is a game developer and an information and communications technology advocate with democracy.net.ph. Full disclosure, like Doc, Attorney Dana and Naz are also my colleagues in the Consortium on Democracy and Disinformation. Welcome, Attorney Dana and Naz, and thank you for joining us in the public square.
Hi, John.
Hi.
Hi, thanks
Attorney
for having
Dana,
us.
hi, Naz. Attorney Dana, I'll start with you. Why should we in the Philippines care about what's happening to Twitter?
Well, okay. I didn't go to Twitter right away. I was on Facebook for a long time. But I went to Twitter because I realized that I was getting my news sources faster, my information faster on Twitter. So for me, Twitter is like the marketplace of ideas. It's a public space where people can discuss and where I can find sources of information. So mawawala iyon when verification is sold na for $8 a month. So I think um, based on your discussion earlier dun sa profitability, maybe he's thinking that he can do with it what newspapers used to do, yung where newspaper owners would just buy into the newspaper and use the public space and as a political leverage for their own business interests.
Yeah, I remember Sheila Coronel talking about that, of course, in another context. No? A famous Filipino publisher said owning a newspaper was like having a gun in your pocket. So this might be a gun in Elon's very huge pocket. Naz, which of the many ICT issues that you follow do you think most at risk with Musk's takeover of Twitter?
Well, first of all, it's freedom of speech. So on October 28th, Musk said comedy is now legal on Twitter. That's something he
Right.
tweeted.
Mm-hmm.
And then a bunch of influencers and celebrities started mocking him and doing parody activity by changing their names to Elon Musk and tweeting things that can mock him. And then back in March for 2019, Musk said, accurate, and entertaining satire is vital to a functioning democracy, unless it's about me. So what happened was there's this popular account, ARB, who's Amy Brown, who was behind the Witty Wendy's account, which was really snarky, and she had 50,000 followers. After she changed her name to Elon Musk and parodied him, her account got suspended. Si Kathy Griffin din, the comedian, and Sarah Silverman. But Sarah Silverman, who has 12 million followers, her account got reinstated. I mean, I don't think it was suspended, but she changed her name back to Sarah Silverman and hindi na suspend. So there's this mass bannings of people. Parang, yun nga, sinabi ni Musk, satire is okay as long as you don't mock me. Parang lumalabas na there's nagiging authoritarian yung Twitter. Then the second biggest threat is a cybersecurity threat, actually, which are disinformation and influence operations. So it's essentially information warfare. So Twitter might be becoming a less civil space because there was a sharp spike in racist language. The N-word saw a 500% increase. And then since anyone can now get since anyone can now get a blue check mark for $8, what's stopping influence operators from getting blue check marks like Russian trolls, etc., and then doing their thing? So those are the two biggest things.
Thank you, Attorney Dana. Those two issues, no, free speech, and uh, even worse, disinformation. Um, do you see that affecting Philippine Twitter users, or is there a way to isolate uh, Philippine Twitter users from the worst that can happen under Musk?
Para kasing ano eh, Twitter is actually, although it's Twitter, it's an app. It's a
Mhm.
space where we all come in and chat.
Mhm.
So it's, it's the Musk Republic now. Lalo na it's private. He can do whatever he wants with it. So I don't think we can isolate Filipino Twitter users. We can leave Twitter if we want, if we don't agree with his policies. But parang ano, if I think he's banking on the fact that a lot of people are just going to stay because everyone's still there.
The Musk Republic. Wow.
They're
Naz,
staying because we can't figure out Mastodon.
yeah, let's talk about Mastodon and other alternatives in a bit. Naz, these issues that you pointed to, no? Free speech, disinformation, and so on. Uh, in a way, maybe the changes in Twitter will amplify them. Is there a way to isolate or protect the other platforms, or do you see this contaminating the other platforms as well? For instance, just being able to buy the verification mark, will that pave the way for other platforms to also sell a similar kind of service?
Well, there's been a lot of talk about maybe people should be paying for social media services so that they don't go under a surveillance capitalism revenue model.
Mhm.
So that's what's happening with Twitter now. So are people gonna walk the talk there? But apparently, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know if the other platforms will be affected much. I think they're in popcorn watch and see mode and trying to learn from what's happening with all this chaos. If anything, particular audiences are looking at Twitter alternatives, like people going for Mastodon. So, like, some people I follow are staying on Facebook and leaving Twitter actually. So they might be gaining from the Twitter chaos pa nga there.
Yeah, I mean, there are people I follow like Leah McElrath who have made an impassioned defense of Twitter. You know, that we need to stay there because people with disabilities, for instance, have found a real home in Twitter. Carl, Musk says that this is all about democratizing journalism. Is it?
And we all know that's a joke, no? Parang democratizing journalism is, um, I mean, among the many problems that journalism is going through, Twitter is not like the democratizing force. If anything, our democratizing was like, I don't know, Blogspot,
Mhm.
like everyone having some kind of voice. The problem isn't people putting their voice out there. The problem the problem is no longer publishing, right? We all now have access to digital publishing tools, everything else. The problem is that the signal to noise ratio in the landscape is napakaraming noise. And so by him saying that, uh, he's not thinking about this information, and that's the problem. In fact, he's spreading this information, right? Like one of the first few things that he did was spread this information about your husband in Nancy Pelosi being attacked.
Mhm.
So if he were living in like 2022 social media and understanding what the landscape is, and he actually really cared about fixing this specific corner of the internet, then he would be considering, not necessarily censorship, but trying to prevent the entrance of bad faith actors, states, etc., trying to control the information that their citizens have access to. But instead, by putting that $8 price tag on the blue check mark, you're essentially signaling to any disinformation operators that this is all you need to be more powerful in spreading disinformation. It costs $8 to increase your capacity to spread like all disinformation on the platform. So is it democratization? No, it's not. It's going to be a problem for democracy advocates.
Yeah, and it looks like that question has been solved many years ago. Doc, you referenced this at the start. No? You said that this was actually a business decision first, and only secondarily a free speech play. How should we read that? I mean, is Musk sincere about the free speech thing? Uh,
Yeah, it's hard to ascribe anything about sincerity, when you talk
Mhm.
about people decisions. But maybe 2 points to reflect on.
Okay.
Decades ago, so Twitter would not be the first social media platform to fail if it did. We had
Mhm.
Friendster, we had Tumblr, ganun, MySpace. And the reason why those platforms failed primarily is they kind of didn't live up to the promise that they gave to their users, both on usability and maybe content. And then you had the fledgling ones like Facebook and Twitter more than willing to take their place. So the same dynamic can easily occur here. So that's one, and so that's why it's for me very hard to just treat it solely as a free speech thing.
Mhm.
If that was important, then Facebook would have died a long time ago. So clearly that's not really a fundamental problem yet. The second point is on this whole commercialization of journalism democratization. I think one thing that is still a clear and present problem in this era of social news is disinformation agents are decentralized while fact checkers are very monolithic. Back in the day of traditional newspapers, TV, both were monolithic. So at least there was channel because they have generally good news content. But then you democratize distribution, but you didn't really democratize kind of the editorial process. And that's the kind of the lopsided situation social media is in right now. And right now, viable other than centralized fact checkers who can never cope up with the kind of the deluge of bad stuff. So for me, my gut tells me there's yet another level to this, rather than just looking at it purely as free speech. There was a social network called Truth Social. I don't know if you've heard of
Mhm.
that. That's mostly right wing stuff. So
Mhm.
no one stops anyone from coming up with a completely slanted, one-sided, social network if they wanted to. So I suspect that's not what Twitter is all about either, because so far so good, people are still there. I think it will start failing if it ceases to be a reliable platform. Like Mastodon, for example,
Mhm.
went down earlier this morning and yesterday because of the influx of new users from
Mhm.
Twitter, which was a fraction of what Twitter's user base is. So clearly, Mastodon isn't the solution. It can be eventually, probably, if they improve the technology. So yeah, I'm kind of, I think the jury is still out on that. I can't really make an assessment on that part.
Quick follow up, Doc, and also Carl. It just occurred to me you were talking, Doc, about monolithic fact checking versus decentralized disinformation efforts. But in fact, Twitter, I think, has made possible OSI, open source investigation. So the example of Bellingcat, that's a terrific template. Do you think that Musk taking over Twitter will have an impact on the work of Bellingcat and others like that?
I don't think they can stay isolated from this. If anything, that would be a good indicator if Musk is really sincere.
Mhm.
If these initiatives to do something more like decentralized citizen reporting and fact checking, if that will be silenced, then the gig is up, and I think everyone will start migrating. But again, it's still early days. It's worth watching how that space develops.
Thanks. Carl, your thoughts?
Yeah, I want to follow up on.
Go
Sorry,
ahead, Dana.
I want to follow up on what Carl said earlier about the democratization of Twitter. I actually
Mhm.
think the commercialization of the blue check mark is the opposite of democratization. Kasi yung blue check mark na yun, it makes it easier for people to believe a Twitter account. You don't have to verify because Twitter says it's verified. So when I
Mhm.
start to follow people, usually kasi I try to look at their accounts and then see what they're tweeting before I
Mhm.
really follow them, and then I just retweet later on. But now that the blue check mark can be sold, that means I have to check each and every account before I follow them and trust them. So those who don't have money to pay for $8 a month won't be as verified, and they'll have a smaller soapbox, so to speak. 'Di ba?
Mhm.
So mas mahirap na makita sila ng mga tao. So that's not democratization, that's the opposite.
That's right.
Yeah, hundred
Carl, I was
percent.
going to ask you about decentralization and monolithic structures.
Yeah, well, I guess just to react to that also, yeah, I 100% agree. Just if I'm running the numbers in my head, one, I don't have a blue check, so hindi ko siya masyadong problema. But
Mhm.
I'm also not willing to pay $8 a month. Like, that's my Netflix, or
Mhm.
that's all these other digital things that I could have. But the fact that, like I was saying earlier, if disinformation operators pony up that money because they're spending this money anyway, then you don't have democratized content. In fact, you have an information landscape that can be controlled with money, and that's essentially not what I mean. We understand, right? We're not naive to the fact that money can control these things, but it really removes power from people if then they have to start paying that $8, and then once they put a paywall up on Twitter, parang it, it's going to totally change. So I agree with Doc. Maybe people just have an exodus. Maybe there's some point where people say this is it. But at the same time, sayang, because we know how powerful Twitter has been for protest movements, for activism, for organizing. So it is a disservice to what Twitter, despite all its flaws, has accomplished in the past if all of those things are lost.
Like, if I can
Yeah.
chime in quickly on that now.
Yeah, go ahead,
I,
please.
I don't know if I don't know if you agree, but one thing that makes Twitter charming to me is that advertising is so obvious that you can ignore it. So when there's like a
Yes.
promoted tweet, forget that. So it's actually a horrible advertising platform, which probably is the reason why they're not making money. Unlike Facebook, it's so subtle. You actually accidentally click on an ad every now and then, and that's how Meta makes billions from it. So if that flips around and Twitter becomes like more of a commercializing, forget about free speech. I don't want to have ads peppering my feed right and left. Then that's already kind of a failure to the promise that Twitter made to its users a long time ago. So I think that's a second
I
Carl mentioned.
agree.
Naz, go ahead.
Um, yeah, I agree with the decentralization of Twitter as a good in terms of users. So Twitter has been good to me. I've met a lot of great people through Twitter, and a lot of celebrities, people I looked up to. I've been able to interact with them through Twitter. And if it's going to be a less democratized space with a lot of uncivil discourse entering it and influence operations, it's going to be really bad.
Yeah. Just listening to you talk about commercialization of Twitter and so on, and then this $8 uh, per month uh, feature um, makes me think that this is actually applying Citizens United to social media platforms. The problem with the current state of U.S. democracy is that they think that money is a form of expression. So essentially, it's like if you have money, sure, then you enjoy free speech. I think that's a real problem. But of course, we're looking at this from the perspective of users in the Philippines, not exactly the largest market for Twitter. That's why I think the rollout of the service, I think, is just for the U.S., Canada, and Australia, if I'm not mistaken. And they'll go around the world. But at the same time, as I've said, Twitter remains an influential, although small, platform in the Philippines. No? People will be affected.
So
Uh,
I wanted to chime in on I agree that it's charming that Twitter ads are sort of
yeah.
sobrang halatang ads. Unlike when I scroll through Instagram and it sort of just knows what to sell me. But when the option becomes Twitter having better advertising so that it can be more sustainable versus
Mhm.
Twitter being sustained by blue check people who are willing to pay blue check marks. I would much prefer to have a better advertising than to only be fed those people who are paying those blue check marks, whether they're relevant to me or not. Because that becomes I think the the option, diba? Because if they're trying to chase that monetization, then it's the paywall, it's the blue check, or it's advertising. And I think we as users would probably benefit if the advertising were better rather than those other options.
Um, just yesterday, there was a report that Musk was considering putting the entire Twitter behind the paywall. Can I get your thoughts on that? I mean,
I think
would
that's
that
going
even
to
work?
absolutely just kill Twitter. End of story. Because, for example, for me, when I go to a lot of articles on the web, when they are on paywalls, I tend to not visit them anymore. And I think there's a similar behavior with Filipinos who surf the internet, because for many Filipinos, the internet is Facebook. And now when they're
Right.
on mobile and they try to visit a website that's outside of Facebook, Facebook gives them a message that you're about to visit a website outside of Facebook or something like that, and you will
Mhm.
incur data charges. So they also tend to stay within the free spaces.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, the whole paywall thing, of course, again, we it could happen, but I remember immediately within 24 hours of the takeover, there were these memes about people pretending that they were laid off from Twitter, and then it turned out to be a joke. So in a way, I've gotten numb to all of these, really crazy stories coming out about Twitter. Maybe, yeah, maybe we'll see if that happens. It seems unlikely that that should be the option. But yeah, the blue check mark seems to be the most worrisome part. And again, if it prevents people from realizing experience Twitter for a while, then yeah, that could potentially disrupt kind of what Twitter already is right now.
Naz and Attorney Dana, what are the alternatives to Twitter?
Okay.
Any
Ako
good
sa
one?
kanila. I tried
Yeah.
Mastodon, pero ang haba ng mga articles. So, I'm still on Twitter, but I'm looking for alternatives. Meanwhile, I'll go back to the traditional websites for sources of information. Dati Facebook, but I don't like the way Facebook decides when to censor accounts.
Attorney Dana, what are you looking for in the alternative?
Ang use kasi sa akin ng Twitter was that I can go straight to the sources of information. So I used to do that with Facebook. Ang isang example ko dyan was during a typhoon in Sendong. I was then still working for a Japanese news agency, and may isang nag-post sa Facebook na nasa bubong na ng bahay niya yung tita niya sa Lanao in Iligan.
Mhm.
And it was an hour before the story came out sa wire agencies. So that was when I started really going to Facebook for
Mhm.
information. So inad ko lahat ng mga police accounts, and then a lot of people na I know I can get information from. Now I can get that on Twitter. That's what I want to sources of information. Pero kung puro blue check marks na, then I don't know whether those accounts are real or trolls, and it will take too long for me to be able to verify each and every account.
Naz, what about you? Looking for alternatives?
Honestly, I'm not too familiar with other microblogging alternatives,
Mhm.
but apparently Plurk is still alive. It's a throwback. Yun lang, for most English and Filipino users, I don't think they'll migrate to it, because if you go to the front page, a lot of the posts are in Japanese, sorry, in Chinese and Russian. And then, so the most popular one right now is Mastodon, which
Mhm.
was built by this German guy, Eugene Rochko, who's CEO and lead developer. So what's really great about Mastodon is that it's free and open source. And then it has what's called federated instances or servers.
Mhm. Yeah.
So it has more freedom than Twitter in that you can own the content more. And then in April two, in April this year, around 30,000 users joined Mastodon when they heard that Musk was looking to buy Twitter. Then as of November 2, Mastodon gained 70,000 users. Then around Monday, I think there were already thousands of registrations per hour. before that, before October 27, 60 to 80 registrations per hour lang eh. And then as of Monday, I think they gained around almost half a million users. So they just passed 1 million users Monday, I think. It's a drop in the bucket compared to Twitter, but there's movement. One thing though is that a lot of people are double dipping. They're opting to stay in Twitter and then
Mhm.
checking out Mastodon as an alternative. So if things get bad on Twitter, I think that's when they will really start moving. Like there was this article recently about academics and how a lot of them were saying that they'd like to check out alternatives to Twitter. So a lot of them created Mastodon accounts, but most of them still stayed on Twitter and they're in wait and see mode.
No,
Carl,
there were a
Doc,
number. Yeah, there were a number of alternatives before pa. No? There's MeWe, and their claim to fame was no ads. But if you want premium features, you pay. So it's similar to what Twitter's trying to do. It's still around, but it has done. There was WT Social by the creator of Wikipedia. Yun din, it purported to have no advertising, no algorithms, and it still didn't catch. I think I don't know if some of you were formerly Friendster and migrated to the two things happened. One is Friendster couldn't keep up with the growth in users, and second, there was this feature on Friendster that allowed you to view who viewed you, and that was created a lot of chaos at that time, a kind of a lack of privacy. And I remember that was my trigger. Now, okay, I'm not going to be here if I can't stalk people, so I'm going to move to Facebook. So again, a similar phenomenon could happen to Twitter, or or could be happening now. If you lose the trust in the platform, that's number one. And number two, you and your friends or whoever your social circle move to another network, then that's the exodus, as we'd like to probably call it.
Carl, do you think it is just good digital hygiene to start looking for alternatives? No, stay on Twitter for a bit, but look at what's out there.
Ako kasi, you know, I found Twitter to be my refuge when Facebook became incredibly toxic a few years ago.
Mhm.
So I'm still hanging around because I'm hopeful that maybe this will work out. But also a question that I have for everybody. So Friendster sort of faded, diba? So Friendster, MySpace, Multiply. I was on Plurk for a long time, but all of these things kind of just faded because there was a moment where everybody was there, and then we kind of left. And sure, there might have been events. So, for example, like Snapchat had a pretty catastrophic event, and then people left, and they're still sort of around, but not as powerful. There are people on TikTok, all this, but point being, all of those they sort of faded because medyo nalaos na sila, hindi na sila kasing fun, and I'm wondering if because Twitter is going through this catastrophic event right now, where not only is it sort of fading, but people are incentivized to leave because of the recent decisions and the acquisition. You know, are we seeing this as something that we give up on, or is this going to be different, or is this going to be, or yeah, it's obvious speculation, but is it something now where probably malalaos siya? Kasi in the same way, I think na Facebook understands that at some point malalaos sila. That's why they're trying to move into the metaverse, right? So that's sort of where I'm looking at is every single social network will have its moment and fade. So maybe this is the fade moment.
But it's also possible that size is its own reward, right? I mean, like Facebook. I mean, you have the community is so large. You even though it can be quite toxic, you don't want to leave, or you want to retain some contact with it. In a way, Twitter, although it's much smaller than Facebook, it's also large enough. Do you think that's a factor for people,
Yeah,
wanting to hang around?
definitely. It's called the network effect. The larger the
Mhm.
network, the more valuable it is. So people will hang around because there's already buy-in. They've invested a lot of time and effort in those platforms. So they'll stick around, I think, until something drastic happens, like what happened to Friendster. Fun factoid: did you know that it was Filipinos who killed Friendster because Friendster couldn't cope with the traffic? So I think it's not Nalaos which killed Friendster. It was the engineering. Friendster became unbearably slow that people just got fed up with it. And I think that's a danger. That's what's going to happen to Twitter now because Musk just fired 3,700 employees, a lot of them engineers. And then one engineer said he's foreseeing that in the coming months or years, slowly the Twitter's performance will be more buggy. It'll exhibit a bit of bugs and performance slowdowns. And so complexity is a feature of all the social media platforms, especially these large ones.
Mhm.
And what Musk did was really bad because he fired a lot of engineers, and these people had institutional knowledge. In fact, what happened was after they fired them, a bunch of them they asked immediately to come back because they realized they were needed actually, these
Yeah.
coders. And then what's this?
Yeah, that's one of the
So,
reasons why I think he was making it up as he went along.
yeah, and then
Thanks, Naz. We're running long. I apologize. I told you hang around for like 35 minutes or so. It's already 46 minutes and running. Let me end with one question for everyone. No? What would be your red line? No? That would force you to quit Twitter. Let me start with Doc, then Carl, then Nas, and then Attorney Dana.
Yeah, for me, the red line is if it stops being useful. We have another parallel problem in another set of platforms, which is the messaging platforms. You can't decide whether you are on Viber, Telegram, and I think the utility there is where can I reach the most people. So the same thing applies to social networks. If most of the people I know are not on Twitter, then why stay? The second utility for me would be information. If I can't get up-to-date information about earthquakes and weather, I think that's what Twitter has over most other platforms. Then wala na. And that's kind of the red line for me.
Yeah, as they say, in the Philippines, when there's an earthquake, the first thing you do is you check Twitter, right? Carl, what's your red line?
I agree. Twitter's fast. Like you guys, I go to Twitter for two things: the uh, information, but also sort of the silly things that you get to do with your friends on Twitter. Um, and honestly, I think that if there is a substantial change because of like we've been saying, the use case is what's important. If you're not getting what you need from it, then wala na. And so I worry that if those blue checks are just everywhere and sila yung mababump up, it's sort of gonna be, you guys remember when Facebook stopped being your closest friends and it became like randos and mga maingay na tao who happen to be in your friends list. I worry that that's what's going to happen, which is going to sour for me. It may not be the final point, but that's gonna be like the first thing is if I'm just seeing things that I don't really care about. But I think I'm gonna try and hang around this as long as possible because we have to. We have to try, I guess, to not let the landscape be filled. But yeah, red line is if everybody's gone or if basically it's a green light for the hellscape to come in. Yeah.
Thanks, Carl. A sign of hope for me was during the U.S. midterms. It was quite sedate. I mean, it could have been taken over by, bad faith actors, but I don't think that happened. Naz, what's your red line?
my red line is if most of the people and topics I follow leave and it becomes full of noise compared to signal. So my big fear is the degradation of experience behind the paywall. So if it's just more noise than signal and it's just eating time with noise, that's when I'll probably leave.
Thanks. And Attorney Dana?
Ako, I want to leave na. Naghahanap na ako talaga ng alternative. When I figure out Mastodon, and once I see the news sources on Twitter in Mastodon, i-delete ko na yung account ko.
Okay, on that charming note, I would like to thank all of you, Attorney Dana Batag, Doc Ligot, Carl Javier, Naz Nazareno. Thank you for making time for this program. Your work in your respective fields helps define and defend the public square. Again, many thanks.
Bye.
That's it for us tonight. The next step for engaged citizens is always to take a more active part in rebuilding our democracy. See you in the public square. This is John Nery. Thank you and good night.